The terminal was alive with the usual hum of activity, travelers rushing to gates, luggage rolling across the polished floors, and the intermittent chime of boarding announcements. But amidst the sea of anonymity, one figure cut through the crowd with quiet authority. Princess Pacquiao, daughter of the legendary Manny Pacquiao, moved with the sort of presence that drew attention without demanding it. Her posture was perfect, her expression calm, but her eyes, a sharp, observant amber, swept the arrival's area like a hawk surveying its territory. She had flown in from Manila, exhausted from hours in the air, yet poised as if she had walked off a runway. Her passport rested in her hand, not out of ceremony but necessity, ready for inspection. As she approached the immigration counter, a subtle shift in the atmosphere caught her attention. The two officers manning the desk exchanged glances, brief nods, and whispered behind their hands. One of them, a man in his late 40s with a neatly trimmed mustache, looked her up and down as if evaluating her worthiness to even step foot in the country. The other, younger, smirked almost imperceptibly, letting a sense of superiority leak through his composure. "Good evening," Princess Pacquiao said softly, extending her passport with a gesture as polite as it was firm. The older officer barely acknowledged her, flipping through the pages with a slow, deliberate indifference. "Purpose of visit?" he asked in a tone that suggested he was already bored, that her presence was an inconvenience to his carefully maintained routine. "Tourism," she replied evenly, masking the rising tension behind a serene smile. The younger officer leaned closer, whispering something to his colleague, though the words were audible enough to sting. "Probably thinks she's too important to follow the rules," he muttered. Princess Pacquiao froze for a fraction of a second, her fingers tightening around her passport. She had expected scrutiny, of course, but the condescension was almost tangible, like a weight pressing down on her shoulders. Around her, travelers slowed, sensing the tension without knowing its cause. Phones discreetly came out, cameras discreetly lifted. The whisper of a viral moment in the making tickled at the edges of the terminal. She decided to remain calm, her voice steady. "I would appreciate it if you processed this promptly," she said, her tone soft but unmistakably firm. The older officer chuckled, the sound low and condescending. "We process everyone, Princess," he said, emphasizing her title with a mocking tilt of the head. The younger officer smirked again, clearly enjoying the display. Princess Pacquiao's pulse quickened. She had faced media scrutiny, public pressure, and the glare of celebrity all her life, but there was something about the sheer arrogance of these two that made her blood boil. Yet, outwardly, she remained composed, like a queen enduring a minor indignity at court. Then came the first sign that this encounter would not be ordinary. A subtle movement at the edge of the hall, a figure in a uniform she recognized from official channels, paused, watching the scene unfold. His presence was almost imperceptible, but Princess Pacquiao noticed the shift in air, the quiet authority that radiated from him. He was assessing, calculating, perhaps ready to intervene if necessary. 9 minutes. That was all she had noticed ticking on the small digital clock above the arrival's gate, though it felt both longer and shorter with every passing second. 9 minutes that would define the course of events in ways she could not yet foresee. The smirk on the younger officer's face faltered slightly when Princess Pacquiao's gaze met his, steady and unwavering. There was a moment of hesitation, a crack in their armor of arrogance, but they quickly masked it, shuffling paperwork with a speed that betrayed their nervousness. Around her, the crowd murmured, some travelers casting sideways glances, sensing a story unfolding before their eyes. Phones clicked discreetly, videos recording the tension without anyone needing to announce it. Social media, Princess Pacquiao knew, was always hungry for moments like this, moments where arrogance meets accountability, where the powerful are humbled, even if momentarily. "Ma'am," the older officer said finally, scanning the passport, "we'll need you to answer a few questions." His tone, though polite in words, dripped with condescension. Princess Pacquiao's eyes narrowed slightly. She had expected questions, yes, but not the subtle insult woven into the delivery. She nodded calmly. "Of course," she said, letting the words flow with the perfect mixture of politeness and controlled authority. The younger officer, sensing a challenge, leaned closer. "Are you traveling alone, Princess?" he asked, his words implying suspicion rather than curiosity. She met his gaze steadily. "Yes," she replied, "and I assure you all my documents are in order." For a moment, silence fell over the counter. The officers exchanged a quick, uneasy glance, and Princess Pacquiao noticed it, the sudden, almost imperceptible recognition that perhaps they had underestimated her. Around her, the hum of the terminal seemed to quiet, as if the world itself had paused to witness the subtle power struggle at the immigration counter. And then, as if cued by some unseen hand, her phone vibrated. She glanced down and saw a message flashing from her father. "Handle it your way. I'm watching." A shiver of controlled excitement ran through her. Her father's message was simple, but its implication was monumental. He trusted her to act, to assert herself, and yet he was already laying the groundwork for consequences that would ripple far beyond this terminal. The officers, oblivious to the silent communication and the invisible eyes upon them, continued their slow processing. But now, Princess Pacquiao could feel the shift. The smirk that had been on the younger officer's face was faltering. The older officer's confidence wavered, subtle yet undeniable. Outside, just beyond the sliding doors, the first flashes of cameras began to capture the moment. Travelers paused mid-step, some craning their necks, sensing that something remarkable was unfolding. A story was being written in real time, one that social media would soon amplify to millions. Princess Pacquiao's heart beat steadily, her mind calculating each word, each gesture. She understood the unspoken rules of power, of influence, of authority. She had been raised in the shadow of one of the world's most disciplined figures, a man who knew how to turn presence into power, observation into action. The clock ticked closer to 9 minutes, each second stretched, pregnant with possibility, heavy with tension. Princess Pacquiao kept her composure, letting the officers think they were in control, all the while knowing that the balance of power had already begun to shift. And then a subtle shadow fell across the office window. A figure, silent, authoritative, observing everything. The air grew taut like a drawn bowstring. Travelers whispered to each other, sensing something monumental was about to occur, though none could predict exactly what. Princess Pacquiao inhaled slowly, the calm in her chest a stark contrast to the storm of anticipation building around her. She had faced cameras, critics, and crowds, but this quiet confrontation with arrogance was different. This was a test of presence, of power, and of timing. 9 minutes. The suspense hung thickly in the air. What would happen when the final second arrived? Who was truly watching, and what consequences would fall in the wake of arrogance meeting authority? The answers were about to unfold, and no one in the terminal, least of all the smug officers, could foresee the storm that Princess Pacquiao had already set in motion. The terminal's fluorescent lights flickered faintly as Princess Pacquiao remained at the immigration counter, passport in hand, her posture unwavering. Every subtle movement of the officers seemed magnified now. The twitch of a shoulder, the narrowing of an eye, the almost imperceptible hesitation in a hand that had waved her paperwork like an insignificant object just moments ago. "Tourism, yes," the older officer repeated, his voice clipped and impatient. He rifled through her documents as though seeking a reason to delay her. The younger officer leaned forward, smirk still plastered on his face, though there was a twitch in his jaw that betrayed unease. Princess Pacquiao's mind raced. She had been trained to remain calm under scrutiny, yet the simmering arrogance of these men tested her patience in ways no paparazzi or overzealous journalist ever had. She let out a slow breath, masking the storm inside. "Yes, tourism," she said evenly, "and all my documentation is in order, as you can see." The older officer raised an eyebrow. All in order, you say. Sometimes appearances can be deceiving. His tone carried a weighty suggestion that she was lying, that she was trying to bypass rules. A soft tingle of anger crept up Princess Pacquiao's spine, but she didn't let it surface. She had learned early from her father that power often manifested in silence. Reacting impulsively would only give the smug officers the advantage. Instead, she straightened her back, locking her gaze on the older man. A subtle movement in the corner of her eye drew her attention. The figure she had noticed earlier, the man who had paused by the edge of the hall, was now taking a few deliberate steps closer. His posture was confident, commanding respect without a word. Princess Pacquiao recognized him immediately, a high-ranking government official who had once trained with her father during charity and sports diplomacy events. Someone who understood influence, authority, and the Pacquiao legacy. The presence of this man shifted the air in the terminal. Even without speaking, his authority radiated across the space like a quiet tidal wave, brushing against the arrogant officers. He stopped a few feet from the counter, observing. Neither officer acknowledged him, yet the smirk on the younger man's face wavered, almost imperceptibly. Princess Pacquiao felt a small surge of reassurance, tempered with curiosity. Who exactly was this observer? Why had he appeared at this precise moment? The timing was uncanny, as if fate, or her father's unseen hand, was orchestrating events with surgical precision. The older officer's fingers paused mid-scan. He glanced up, squinting slightly at the man in the corner. The younger officer, sensing the shift, leaned closer to his colleague. "Did you know he was here?" he whispered. The older officer shook his head subtly, his lips tight. "No idea, just focus," he murmured, though his voice lacked conviction. Princess Pacquiao noted every detail, the hesitation, the whispered exchange, the subtle tremor in the younger officer's hands. It was as if the balance of power was tipping without anyone outside the room realizing it. She remained outwardly calm, a serene figure amidst the undercurrent of chaos. Then a small vibration against her hip drew her attention. She checked her phone, a message from her father. "Handle it your way, I'm watching." The words, simple yet heavy with meaning, ignited a controlled fire within her. It wasn't just a message, it was a signal. The responsibility to act decisively, to assert authority without aggression, was hers, but it also carried a promise of consequences, a ripple effect that would reach far beyond this terminal. The older officer, now visibly frustrated, slammed the passport down and muttered, "Step aside while we verify this further." His tone, meant to assert dominance, only fueled Princess Pacquiao's resolve. She would not step aside. Not now, not ever. "I am standing right here," she said, her voice soft but sharp, slicing through the tension. "I am fully compliant with your procedures, but I will not be disrespected." The younger officer's smirk flickered into a grimace. He shuffled papers, fumbling slightly, clearly unsettled. The official in the corner finally spoke, his voice low but firm, carrying across the small distance. "Gentlemen, I suggest you reconsider your approach." The effect was immediate. The officers stiffened, and for the first time, Princess Pacquiao saw uncertainty cloud their expressions. Their arrogance was clashing with authority they hadn't anticipated, and the realization unsettled them. Around them, travelers were beginning to notice. Phones were discreetly lifted, cameras recording the drama in real time. Whispers filled the terminal. "Who is she? Is she really a Pacquiao? What's going on with immigration?" Social media's hungry tendrils were reaching into the moment even before the official story had a chance to unfold. The air thickened with anticipation. Princess Pacquiao noticed the younger officer's eyes flicker toward the figure at the edge of the hall, as if seeking guidance, or perhaps silently pleading. The older officer's jaw tightened. Both men were beginning to sense that the situation was no longer theirs to control. Then, without warning, the younger officer dropped a paper on the counter and said, We just need some verification." His voice trembled slightly, Princess Pacquiao, maintaining her composure, offered a calm nod. Of course, verification is part of the process. I respect the process, but respect works both ways. A hush fell over the counter. The statement, delivered with quiet authority, hung in the air like a challenge no one dared respond to immediately. The official in the corner raised an eyebrow subtly, a silent acknowledgement of her tact and control. 9 minutes. She felt the countdown in her chest, every second a reminder of how quickly power could shift when wielded wisely. She observed the officers closely, noting every micro-expression, the twitch of a finger, the dart of an eye, the subtle tightening of a jaw. These men thought they held authority. They had no idea the forces aligned against them. A soft chime from her phone drew her attention again. Another message, this time a single word: soon. The implication was unmistakable. Something was already in motion behind the scenes, orchestrated with precision, timed perfectly to expose the arrogance before them. The officers, unaware of the invisible chain of influence, continued their slow verification. The crowd had grown, travelers sensing a story unfolding before them, some murmuring, others raising phones to record the exchange. Cameras flashed discreetly, capturing the tension, the subtle clash of authority, and the poised figure of Princess Pacquiao standing tall. Then a sudden movement. The official in the corner strode forward, his presence commanding immediate attention. He spoke quietly, but his words carried weight far beyond their volume. The older officer's eyes widened. The younger officer stiffened. The subtle shift in power was palpable. Even the terminal seemed to pause, aware that something extraordinary was happening. Princess Pacquiao's heart remained steady, but a spark of satisfaction glimmered in her eyes. The stage was set. The arrogance that had dared challenge her dignity was about to meet consequences it had never imagined. And just as she anticipated, a faint, almost imperceptible tremor ran through the officers. Their smirks had disappeared entirely. The moment was teetering on the edge of climax. What would happen when the unseen mechanisms of influence completed their work? Travelers whispered. Phones clicked. Cameras flashed. Social media's invisible web tightened around the scene, ready to amplify every second into millions of views worldwide. The final seconds of the 9-minute countdown approached, a silent drumbeat underscoring the drama. Princess Pacquiao's composure remained unshaken, but the tension in the air was electric. Everyone watching felt it, even the officers themselves. The balance of power had shifted, and the consequences were imminent. The question hung in the air: who would emerge victorious in this clash of authority, arrogance, and influence? And how devastating would the fallout be? The answer was about to reveal itself in a way no one in the terminal could predict. The terminal air felt heavier, charged with anticipation. Travelers paused mid-step, smartphones raised, recording the subtle but electric confrontation at the immigration counter. The once smug officers now fidgeted, their confident postures crumbling under pressure they hadn't anticipated. Princess Pacquiao remained perfectly poised, a calm eye in the storm of mounting chaos, her amber gaze fixed on the older officer, whose hands trembled slightly as he rifled through her documents. And then, the figure at the corner of the terminal moved. He wasn't just an observer anymore. The high-ranking government official who had been quietly watching approached the counter with measured steps. Every movement radiated authority without arrogance. There was a subtle command in his posture, a silent declaration that this terminal, this moment, was under his scrutiny. The officers froze. Even without a word, the official's presence demanded attention. The younger officer swallowed hard, trying to regain composure, but his throat betrayed him with a slight dry rasp. The older officer's fingers hovered mid-scan, then shook slightly as if the documents themselves weighed heavier under the gaze of authority. Princess Pacquiao's heart beat steadily, but inside, a surge of anticipation coursed through her. She recognized the official immediately, someone who had trained alongside her father during various public service and sports diplomacy initiatives. He wasn't just an ally. He understood influence, timing, and the subtle art of enforcing respect. His presence in this exact moment was no accident. "Gentlemen," he said quietly, his voice calm but carrying a weight that made the two officers straighten in reflexive deference, "I suggest you reconsider your approach." A hush fell over the counter. The word approach wasn't a question, it was a challenge disguised in courtesy. The older officer's jaw tightened. The younger officer's smirk faltered entirely, replaced by a pale uncertainty. Princess Pacquiao noted the micro-expressions, the twitch of a finger, the rapid dart of an eye, the subtle downward shift of the shoulders. This was not just fear, it was recognition. Recognition of power they had not anticipated, a realization that they were no longer in control. The official's gaze swept the room, briefly catching the eyes of the travelers filming discreetly. He gave no nods, no acknowledgments, only the faintest trace of a knowing smile, almost imperceptible as if the entire drama had been foreseen. The older officer's voice cracked. We just need to verify the documents further," he stammered. His usual arrogance had evaporated entirely. Princess Pacquiao tilted her head ever so slightly, her expression serene but unwavering. "Verification is part of the process," she said. "I respect the process, but respect works both ways." The statement was simple, yet it hung over the counter like a verdict. Even without physical action, the power shift was undeniable. The officer's silence spoke volumes. Around her, travelers whispered. Phones clicked. Cameras flashed. Every movement, every word was being recorded for an audience far beyond the walls of the terminal. Suddenly, the younger officer fumbled, dropping a pen onto the counter. He bent to retrieve it, but his hands shook visibly. The older officer's composure was cracking, his eyes flicking nervously to the official and then to Princess Pacquiao. He realized too late that arrogance had led him to underestimate the situation. Princess Pacquiao's mind worked methodically. She had expected scrutiny, but she had not anticipated this level of passive intervention. The official had elevated the situation to a level that was now beyond anyone's ability to manipulate. Every second, every micro-expression was evidence that her patience, her strategy, and her authority were already beginning to manifest consequences. Then came a movement from behind the counter, a shadow slipping along the edge of the officer's office door. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but Princess Pacquiao caught it immediately. A staff member, someone from internal HR, had arrived quietly, summoned by the same invisible chain of influence that had orchestrated the official's presence. Their eyes met briefly, and the acknowledgement was mutual. The stage was set, the plan in motion, and the clock ticking down to the final 9-minute climax. The tension was suffocating. Travelers sensed it instinctively, whispering and gesturing toward their phones. The social media storm was growing organically. The first videos of the confrontation were already circulating online, hashtags forming before anyone had even considered them. The world, though unaware of the meticulous orchestration behind the scenes, was beginning to witness the unraveling of arrogance in real time. Princess Pacquiao remained calm, but her mind catalogued everything: the officer's reactions, the subtle cues from the official, and the unseen movements of HR staff. Timing was everything. The plan didn't rely on brute force or confrontation. It relied on precision, observation, and the strategic deployment of authority. The older officer finally broke the silence. "Princess, we are just following protocol," he said, his voice now tinged with desperation. Princess Pacquiao's gaze sharpened, but her expression remained composed. "And I am fully compliant," she said, her voice quiet yet firm. "I am here, following your protocol, but I will not tolerate disrespect." The words landed like a hammer. The younger officer flinched visibly. The official in the corner nodded ever so slightly, as if acknowledging that her words had delivered the necessary psychological blow. The balance had shifted irreversibly. The arrogance that had once empowered these men was now collapsing in real time. From behind the counter, a faint click signaled that internal systems were being activated. HR protocols had begun in the background, silently, invisibly. Termination procedures, disciplinary actions, immediate review, all had been triggered before the officers even realized the gravity of their situation. The plan had been orchestrated with the precision of a chess master. Every piece moved without the others knowing it was happening. The older officer's hands trembled, his fingers tightening around the passport. The younger officer's face drained of color. The official, silent, continued to observe, a silent judge to the unfolding drama. Princess Pacquiao's pulse remained steady, her composure absolute, but her mind was alert, every detail catalogued and accounted for. The countdown had reached 8 minutes and 45 seconds. Less than a minute remained before the culmination of carefully orchestrated events. The suspense was palpable. Travelers leaned forward, cameras at the ready. The world outside the terminal was unaware of the magnitude of what was about to happen, but inside, the stage was set for an unprecedented display of authority, precision, and justice. Princess Pacquiao glanced subtly at her phone. Another message from her father, almost there. She felt a small, controlled smile tug at the corner of her lips. The invisible machinery of influence, strategy, and respect was ready to strike. The officers had no idea what was coming, and the moment of reckoning would be swift and undeniable. And then, at that precise moment, the official stepped even closer to the counter, his presence making the officers flinch involuntarily. The balance of power had fully shifted. Princess Pacquiao stood perfectly still, serene and poised, as the invisible forces aligned perfectly around her. The social media cameras, the witnesses, the staff, and the silent authority of the official, all were ready. The officer's arrogance, which had seemed unshakable mere minutes ago, was now collapsing like a house of cards. They could feel it instinctively, though they had no understanding of the forces at work. The question that hung in the air: would they survive the 9-minute judgment? Seconds ticked on, each one magnifying the tension. The crowd could feel it, the officers could feel it, Princess Pacquiao herself could feel it, a moment suspended in time, poised for revelation. And then, with only 45 seconds left, the first move in the final act began, invisible to all but those orchestrating the moment behind the scenes. The terminal had fallen into a peculiar silence, punctuated only by the faint hum of conveyor belts and the distant rolling of luggage. But beneath the mundane sounds, the air itself seemed charged, like the moment before a storm breaks. Princess Pacquiao stood at the immigration counter, calm, poised, yet acutely aware of every heartbeat around her. The arrogant officers who had once smirked now fidgeted under the weight of scrutiny and impending consequences. 9 minutes. The clock ticking somewhere in the background had become the silent drumbeat of inevitability. Each second was a pulse, a reminder that the balance of power had shifted, and that within moments the stage would be set for consequences the officers could never have imagined. Princess Pacquiao's amber eyes flicked subtly toward the government official who had been silently orchestrating the situation. His gaze was steady, unwavering, yet full of unspoken communication. She understood his silent words perfectly. The countdown has begun. Prepare for the final act. The older officer shifted, glancing nervously at his colleague. The younger officer's smirk had vanished entirely, replaced with a rigid tension that spoke volumes. Every fidget, every uncertain glance, revealed the growing realization that they had overstepped, that arrogance had blinded them to the forces aligned against them. We need to verify," the older officer began, but his voice faltered. Princess Pacquiao's voice, calm yet commanding, cut through the silence. "I have provided all necessary documentation," she said. "Verification is part of the process, but respect cannot be overlooked. It is the foundation of your authority, and it is clear it has been ignored here." The statement hung in the air like a verdict. Around them, travelers whispered. Phones clicked, discreetly filming the drama. The hum of social media notifications began to pulse through the terminal. The crowd, sensing the weight of the moment, leaned in slightly, capturing history in real time. The government official stepped closer, his presence a physical manifestation of authority. He made no gestures, issued no threats, yet the room felt smaller, the air heavier. The officer's shoulders stiffened. The smirk that had once signaled casual arrogance was now replaced by an almost imperceptible tremor of fear. Then a faint sound behind the counter, a soft click, caught Princess Pacquiao's attention. HR systems had begun to activate silently, invisibly. Termination protocols were in motion, disciplinary reviews being triggered, all orchestrated through unseen channels. Within minutes, the officers' careers would be unraveling, a domino effect that had been meticulously planned yet invisible to those who had provoked it. The younger officer's hand shook as he picked up a pen, fumbling with paperwork. His eyes flicked nervously to the official, then to Princess Pacquiao. He had no idea what invisible forces were now moving against him, no understanding of the machinery already in motion. A whisper ran through the gathered travelers. Is she really a Pacquiao? Who is that official? What's happening? Phones were discreetly lifted, cameras rolling, as the story began to spread beyond the terminal. Social media's invisible web was tightening, ready to amplify every subtle movement. Princess Pacquiao's pulse remained steady. Every detail, the twitch of a finger, the tremor in a jaw, the shifting gaze, was catalogued in her mind. Timing was everything. Every moment had been calculated, every actor in the unfolding drama strategically positioned. The final act would play out with precision, and she would remain the calm center of it all. The older officer glanced at the clock, a subtle shift in his gaze betraying the creeping panic. He had no idea how close the end of the 9-minute countdown was. Every second had brought him closer to consequences he hadn't imagined, yet he was powerless to stop the tide. Princess Pacquiao subtly shifted her weight, a slight movement, imperceptible to most, but a signal to the government official. He acknowledged her cue with the faintest nod. The orchestration was nearly complete. The unseen staff behind the counter, monitoring HR systems and security feeds, were ready. Every domino was lined up, every contingency accounted for. Then, almost imperceptibly, the terminal seemed to hold its collective breath. Travelers froze mid-step, cameras poised, as if the entire building had sensed the impending climax. Even the officers seemed aware, subconsciously, that something monumental was about to strike. The younger officer's hands trembled so visibly now that he could no longer mask it. The older officer's jaw clenched, his face pale. Princess Pacquiao's phone buzzed again. She glanced at it, another message from her father, one word flashing across the screen: now. Her heart remained steady, but a spark of satisfaction glimmered in her eyes. The invisible chain of influence had been activated. The forces aligned against the officers were ready to move in perfect synchrony. The countdown was reaching its final seconds. The government official's gaze swept the terminal one last time, catching the eyes of the officers. There was no need for words. They understood now that their arrogance had consequences far beyond their imagination. The humiliation, the disciplinary action, the immediate termination, they could sense it closing in like a storm. Princess Pacquiao's mind catalogued every detail. She had anticipated scrutiny, arrogance, and subtle resistance. But she had also anticipated power. Authority is a currency, and she had spent it wisely. The officers had underestimated her, underestimated the influence and legacy that surrounded her. 5 minutes, 4 minutes. The seconds ticked down with a palpable weight, each one magnifying the tension. Travelers whispered, some nudging each other, capturing the unfolding spectacle. Social media notifications surged, hashtags forming organically. Respect Princess Pacquiao, 9-minute justice. The older officer glanced again at the clock. His face was pale, lips pressed tightly together. He finally realized, too late, that the mechanisms in motion were unstoppable. Every micro-expression, every subtle movement from the official and Princess Pacquiao had been orchestrated to lead to this inevitable conclusion. 3 minutes, 2 minutes. The younger officer's hand shook visibly as he fumbled with documents. The sweat on his forehead betrayed his panic. The crowd, sensing the crescendo, leaned forward. Cameras clicked. Phones recorded every second of the unraveling. Princess Pacquiao remained serene, calm, in control. She had anticipated this moment for years, not just the arrogance of strangers, but the timing, the precision, the orchestration of unseen forces. Every move had been calculated, every actor in the drama playing their part perfectly, whether knowingly or unwittingly. The older officer's voice cracked as he stammered, We are just following protocol." Princess Pacquiao's gaze did not waver. "And I am fully compliant," she said evenly. "But respect is not optional. You will learn that soon." The official nodded subtly, a silent signal to the HR staff and unseen authorities. In that instant, the dominoes began to fall. Termination procedures, disciplinary reviews, immediate suspension, all triggered with precision. The officer's arrogance had left them blind to the storm closing in. 60 seconds remained. The terminal seemed to hold its collective breath. Travelers sensed the climax, cameras poised, whispering under their breath, capturing history in the making. Social media's invisible web tightened, ready to amplify every movement to millions of viewers. Princess Pacquiao inhaled slowly. The countdown had reached its final moments. Every second had been accounted for. The stage was set. The moment of reckoning was imminent. And then, with 9 minutes nearly elapsed, the invisible machinery of justice, influence, and respect was ready to strike. The terminal seemed to hold its breath. The bustling chatter of travelers, the rolling of luggage, the distant hum of airplanes, all faded into a background drone against the tension that gripped the immigration area. Every eye was drawn to the counter, where Princess Pacquiao stood composed, a figure of serene authority amidst the storm of fear and anticipation. The officers who had once smirked arrogantly now trembled visibly, each micro-movement betraying their growing realization. Their moment of control had ended. The older officer's fingers hovered over the passport scanner, trembling. His colleague's posture was rigid, his once confident smirk replaced by a frozen mask of disbelief. Sweat glistened on foreheads, hands fumbled with paperwork, and the faintest whisper of panic seeped into the air. "Gentlemen," Princess Pacquiao began, her voice calm yet slicing through the tension like a scalpel, "I have complied with all your procedures. I have remained patient. I have followed every protocol required. But your behavior, your arrogance, your condescension is not acceptable." The words hit like a hammer. The older officer's jaw tightened, and the younger officer's hands shook as he tried to adjust the scattered documents. Travelers leaned in subtly, phones discreetly recording, capturing every nuance of the confrontation. A few even whispered to each other, unable to resist murmuring about the unfolding spectacle. At that precise moment, the government official stepped closer to the counter, his presence commanding the attention of all. He didn't need to raise his voice. Authority emanated from him like a magnetic force. The officers stiffened, exchanging uncertain glances. For the first time, they realized the scope of the situation. They were no longer in a simple procedural moment. They were in the crosshairs of influence, legacy, and consequence. The older officer tried to speak, stammering, "We are just following procedure." Princess Pacquiao's gaze never wavered. Her amber eyes locked onto his, steady and unyielding. "And I have followed procedure," she said. "But respect is the foundation of your authority. You have ignored it, and you will be held accountable." A faint click echoed behind the counter. The HR mechanisms activated, unseen, silent, immediate. Termination procedures, disciplinary reviews, and emergency reporting were triggered. A chain reaction set in motion without anyone's awareness. Within moments, the careers of these two officers would collapse, leaving no room for excuses, no avenue for escape. The younger officer's hands shook violently as he fumbled with paperwork. His eyes darted toward the official, pleading silently for some reprieve. But the official's expression remained calm, unyielding, a silent arbiter of justice. Princess Pacquiao's pulse remained steady. She had trained for situations like this, not just in public scrutiny, but in the subtler art of influence and control. Every gesture, every tone of voice, every subtle glance had been calculated, a precise orchestration designed to let consequences fall naturally, elegantly, and with undeniable authority. "Enough," the official finally said, his voice low but carrying the weight of finality. "Your behavior will not be tolerated. Immediate actions will be taken. Stand aside." The officers froze, their eyes wide, as HR staff quietly entered the scene, moving with quiet efficiency. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. The mechanisms had been triggered and the chain reaction was already in motion. In less than a minute, both men would be removed from their positions. One of the travelers in the crowd whispered under their breath, recording the moment with their phone, This is insane. Look at her. She's not just standing up to them, she's orchestrating it." The social media storm was building in real time. Hashtags began to trend even before the officers had realized the magnitude of their predicament. Respect Princess Pacquiao, 9-minute justice. The terminal, unknowingly, had become the stage for a viral spectacle that would reach millions worldwide. The older officer attempted one last defiant gesture, trying to maintain authority. This is ridiculous." Princess Pacquiao's gaze sharpened, calm, controlled, yet carrying the full weight of her presence. "It is not ridiculous," she said softly. "It is accountability, and accountability comes swiftly when arrogance is allowed to overstep." At that moment, a security officer stepped forward, nodding subtly to the HR staff behind the counter. The signal was silent but unmistakable. Within seconds, the officers were being escorted from the counter. Their faces were pale, expressions twisted between disbelief and humiliation. The realization hit them fully. Their careers, once stable, had collapsed in a matter of minutes. Travelers whispered, phones clicked, and the cameras flashed. Every movement, every reaction was being captured, amplified, and shared. The story was no longer just about arrogance or protocol. It had become a lesson in influence, poise, and the weight of respect. Princess Pacquiao remained composed, her posture unshaken. She had faced cameras, critics, and public scrutiny before, but this moment was different. This was a live demonstration of authority, a precise orchestration that required patience, timing, and the subtle art of letting consequences unfold naturally. The officers, now escorted through the terminal, cast one final glance toward her. Their expressions were a mixture of disbelief, shame, and fear. They understood only partially what had happened, how quickly their arrogance had been dismantled, how completely the consequences had been executed, and how perfectly they had been orchestrated by a network of influence they hadn't even realized existed. Social media exploded. Videos posted immediately, capturing the confrontation in detail. Viewers around the world were captivated, not just by the spectacle, but by the precision of Princess Pacquiao's approach. Every word, every glance, every subtle cue from the official had been perfectly aligned to deliver an unforgettable lesson. The official gave a subtle nod to Princess Pacquiao, a silent acknowledgement of her composure, her strategy, and her execution. No words were needed. The message was clear. The situation had been handled with precision, dignity, and authority. And yet, even as the officers were led away, the suspense lingered. Travelers whispered among themselves, who else might witness this? Who else might be influenced by the demonstration of calm power, precise strategy, and the consequences of unchecked arrogance? The ripple effect was only beginning. Princess Pacquiao finally relaxed slightly, though her eyes remained alert. She had faced the storm, orchestrated the outcome, and remained the calm eye at its center. The terminal was alive again with the normal hum of travel, but the story had already been written. Arrogance had met accountability, patience had met power, and influence had spoken louder than authority alone ever could. The final seconds of the 9-minute countdown had passed. What had begun as a simple act of protocol had transformed into a lesson that would reverberate far beyond the walls of the terminal. Princess Pacquiao glanced at her phone one last time. Another message from her father appeared, handled. She allowed herself a faint, satisfied smile. The orchestration was complete, the consequences delivered, and the lesson clear. Travelers whispered, recording the moment, sharing it instantly with the world. Social media amplified the drama, spreading the story like wildfire. The officer's arrogance, once unchecked, had been dismantled in minutes. Princess Pacquiao's poise, strategy, and calm execution had ensured justice was swift and undeniable. And yet, a lingering suspense remained in the air. While the immediate confrontation had ended, the ripple effects, the questions of who else had witnessed this, who would be influenced by it, and who would learn from it, were only beginning. Princess Pacquiao stepped away from the counter, her posture perfect, her expression serene. The world had seen her authority, her strategy, and her calm power. But the ultimate impact, the legacy of this 9-minute confrontation, was only starting to unfold. The terminal had returned to its normal rhythm, the distant roar of jet engines and the rolling of luggage resuming their familiar cadence. Yet beneath the surface, the aftershocks of the confrontation at the immigration counter rippled invisibly like the quiet tremors after an earthquake. Travelers whispered among themselves, phones still raised, fingers scrolling, posting, tagging, sharing. The moment had gone viral before anyone even left the terminal. Princess Pacquiao walked slowly past the departing officers, her gaze calm but unwavering. The two men had been escorted through a side exit, heads bowed, faces pale with humiliation. Their expressions were a mixture of disbelief, fear, and the first flickers of understanding. They had underestimated her influence, and the consequences had struck faster than their arrogance could defend against. On the floor, travelers stopped to glance back, their whispers rising. "Did you see that?" one murmured, eyes wide. "She didn't raise her voice, and yet they're gone." Another snapped a photo, already uploading it with the caption, "9-minute justice." Cameras clicked, social media notifications pinged, and the story began to spread like wildfire. The government official who had orchestrated much of the silent intervention stayed nearby, a quiet presence at the edge of the crowd. He didn't speak, but his posture exuded authority, a subtle reassurance that the situation had been handled, that the officer's removal was final and irrevocable. Princess Pacquiao's phone buzzed again. A notification from her father appeared, clean sweep. She allowed herself a brief, satisfied exhale. The orchestration was complete. The arrogance had been met with precise, unstoppable consequence, yet she remained alert. There was always the ripple effect, the unseen reactions from those watching, both publicly and behind the scenes. By now, news crews had started gathering outside the terminal. Social media posts multiplied exponentially. Videos of the confrontation, images of her poised demeanor, hashtags trending globally. #Respect Princess Pacquiao surged, capturing the imagination of millions. Analysts, bloggers, and journalists began dissecting every detail. How had a simple immigration encounter escalated into a viral moment of instant justice? The story was mesmerizing precisely because it combined poise, strategy, and the unstoppable force of consequences executed with perfect timing. Inside the terminal, murmurs of astonishment spread. Travelers who had witnessed the event firsthand spoke in hushed tones, recounting the officer's arrogance, the government official's quiet intervention, and Princess Pacquiao's unshakable calm. Some admitted they had initially thought the officers were in control, but every second had revealed a different reality. Authority without respect is fragile, they realized, and it could collapse in an instant. Meanwhile, the two officers, now outside the public eye, were processing the reality of what had occurred. HR officials had followed through with immediate termination and disciplinary action, citing unprofessional conduct and a breach of protocol. Their arrogance had blinded them, and the consequences were swift and unavoidable. They would no longer occupy positions of authority, and their names would forever be linked to a cautionary tale circulating on social media worldwide. Princess Pacquiao, however, remained a study in composure. She moved through the terminal with the calm of someone who had executed a precise mission. Her demeanor conveyed that she had been tested, had observed carefully, and had acted decisively, but without aggression or unnecessary spectacle. Her influence was not loud. It was strategic, calculated, and ultimately unstoppable. As she reached the exit, she was approached by a small crowd of travelers who had watched the entire incident. One young woman, trembling slightly, stepped forward. "Ma'am, I've never seen anyone do that before. Calm, polite, and yet so powerful." Princess Pacquiao smiled faintly. "Sometimes you don't need to shout to make sure your voice is heard," she said softly, her words carrying a quiet authority. The crowd murmured in agreement, some nodding, others recording every word. Meanwhile, the social media storm intensified. Within minutes, clips of the confrontation had been shared millions of times. Analysts debated the significance, the psychology of arrogance meeting strategy, the importance of respect in positions of authority, and the viral amplification of accountability. Each post, each video, each comment spread the lesson further. The officer's misstep had inadvertently created a case study in humility, influence, and immediate consequence. Back at the terminal's security office, HR officials documented the incident in meticulous detail. Every action, every timestamp, every subtle gesture was recorded. The documentation ensured that the consequences were not only immediate but also indisputable. There would be no dispute, no appeal to pride, no defense against the meticulously orchestrated accountability. The officers had overplayed their hand, and the system had responded with precision. Princess Pacquiao, meanwhile, moved toward the waiting car that would take her to her next destination. Cameras followed, flashes illuminating her path, but she didn't rush. She absorbed the moment, understanding that this wasn't just about two officers. It was about sending a message, visible to the world, about the power of presence, respect, and strategic authority. Her father, Manny Pacquiao, had built a reputation not just as a boxer but as a disciplined strategist in both public and private life. She had inherited more than skill. She had inherited a mindset: observe, calculate, and act with precision. Today, the 9-minute confrontation had become a live demonstration of that philosophy. As she settled into the car, she glanced back at the terminal. Travelers still whispered, phones still recorded, and social media still buzzed. The moment had transcended a simple airport incident. It had become a story of influence, strategy, and undeniable consequence. Yet even as the immediate fallout unfolded, a subtle suspense lingered. Who else had witnessed this? How would it shape the behavior of those in positions of authority in the future? The ripple effect was only beginning. What had happened in 9 minutes would be discussed, analyzed, and remembered far longer than anyone in that terminal could have anticipated. Inside the car, Princess Pacquiao allowed herself a faint smile. She had observed, waited, and acted. She had turned arrogance into accountability, and disrespect into a lesson that would echo far beyond the confines of an airport terminal. The story, however, was not hers alone. It belonged now to the world watching in real time, to the millions on social media, to those who would learn that authority without respect is fragile. Yet in her mind there was one lingering thought: the unseen forces, the ripple effects, the silent witnesses beyond the cameras. What would they do with the lesson they had witnessed? Who else might take note? Who else might be inspired, and who might be held accountable in ways yet unseen? The suspense of the aftermath was as potent as the confrontation itself. The car door closed, the engine purred, and Princess Pacquiao leaned back. The immediate crisis had passed, but the world outside was buzzing with the story she had orchestrated. Arrogance had been humbled, respect had been asserted, and justice, swift and undeniable, had been delivered. And yet, as she glanced at her phone one last time, she couldn't help but wonder, who else had been watching? Who else would learn from this? The 9-minute countdown had ended, but the echoes of its impact were only just beginning. The world outside the terminal had erupted. Social media feeds were flooded with clips, images, and eyewitness accounts of the 9-minute confrontation. News outlets were scrambling, reporters racing to piece together what had happened, yet few could grasp the meticulous orchestration behind the drama. For millions, it appeared almost cinematic, a perfect storm of arrogance meeting authority, executed by a calm, composed figure who refused to be disrespected. But the truth, known only to a few, was far more intricate, strategic, and unprecedented. Princess Pacquiao sat in the back of the car, her phone buzzing incessantly. Messages of support poured in from friends, family, and admirers across the globe. Fans praised her composure, her eloquence, her unwavering dignity. But nestled among the messages were subtle reports, sent by allies who had been monitoring the officers and their records. Each update confirmed that the consequences were unfolding exactly as planned. Every disciplinary action, every termination, every administrative review was proceeding on schedule. The precision of the execution was flawless. Her thoughts drifted back to the moment at the immigration counter. How the older officer had sneered, how the younger had smirked, how they had underestimated the power of patience, strategy, and observation. Every gesture, every word had been calculated not just to maintain composure, but to catalyze an outcome invisible to the casual observer. She had known, from the instant the officer's arrogance surfaced, that their undoing was inevitable, but the satisfaction of seeing it unfold was unparalleled. A subtle ping on her phone drew her attention to a new message, a video clip sent from an unknown source. She opened it and paused. It was from a security camera positioned in a nearby terminal corridor, capturing the officer's expressions before, during, and after the confrontation. The younger officer's smirk faltered, the older officer's jaw tightened, and both were pale with the dawning realization of the consequences closing in. Princess Pacquiao allowed herself a small smile. Every reaction was exactly as predicted. Every subtle tremor, hesitation, and glance had been a piece of the puzzle she had orchestrated from the shadows. Her father's voice echoed in her memory. Influence isn't loud, it's precise, it's subtle, and it is unstoppable when deployed correctly. Manny Pacquiao had taught her that authority alone was empty. Influence, patience, and strategy were the true instruments of power. Today, every lesson had been executed flawlessly. The car slowed at a red light, and Princess Pacquiao's eyes scanned the cityscape outside. Billboards, streetlights, and passing vehicles blurred past, yet her mind was entirely focused on the ripples her actions had created. Beyond the terminal, beyond social media, beyond the officers themselves, the lesson had already begun to spread. Authority without respect is fragile. Arrogance is a liability. Strategic calm and precision can dismantle the most unshakable facade. Her phone buzzed again. This time, it was a direct call from the government official who had been present at the terminal. She answered immediately. "Princess?" His voice was calm, measured, yet carried a hint of admiration. "The officer's actions have been fully documented. HR confirms that termination and review procedures are complete. Their responses were exactly as we anticipated." Princess Pacquiao's lips curved into a subtle smile. "Thank you," she replied. "Everything unfolded perfectly. Their arrogance, their hesitation, their eventual panic, all of it played exactly as it should." "Indeed," he said. "Few understand the precision of timing and influence you demonstrated. What you executed today is a textbook example of authority leveraged through strategy rather than confrontation." She allowed herself a small, reflective pause. And yet, she said softly, the story they see, the viral narrative, they will never understand the layers behind it. The subtle orchestration, the timing, the unseen networks of influence, that part remains hidden. The official's voice carried a quiet chuckle. That's the power of strategy. The world will remember the outcome, but the method, its elegance and precision, remains your secret. Few will ever comprehend it, and those who do will respect it profoundly. Princess Pacquiao hung up, placing her phone on her lap. The revelation was profound, even to her. The moment at the terminal was no longer simply a confrontation. It was a masterclass in influence and timing. The officers had underestimated her, underestimated the silent forces aligned with her, and underestimated the power of subtle orchestration. Her mind wandered back to the terminal itself. The travelers who had witnessed the scene firsthand, the phones capturing every movement, the social media feeds already trending. It was all a cascade, a ripple effect that would extend far beyond the airport walls. The confrontation was now a viral case study in authority, respect, and strategic calm. Yet the true revelation lay beyond public perception. Those who had orchestrated the situation behind the scenes, the government official, HR staff, and her father's subtle guidance, had acted with precision. Every invisible step, every quiet action, had been coordinated to produce maximum effect without overt confrontation. The elegance of the plan was in its invisibility, the power of its execution in its subtlety. Princess Pacquiao's phone buzzed once more. This time it was a simple message from her father. "Well done. You've made them remember respect." She allowed herself a brief smile, a moment of quiet triumph. The officers had learned a lesson they would never forget. The world had witnessed a demonstration of power executed flawlessly. And yet, the hidden orchestration, the subtle web of influence and timing, remained a secret, a revelation known only to those who had been aligned with her. She reflected on the journey that had led her here. From the lessons learned in the shadow of her father's career, to the countless hours of observing human behavior, to the quiet study of influence and authority, every piece had culminated in this 9-minute episode. The officer's arrogance had been the spark, but her preparation, strategy, and patience had fanned it into a lesson that would echo far beyond the terminal. Even as the viral story spread globally, she understood that the most profound impact was invisible. People would remember her poise, her calm, her authority. But only a select few, the orchestrators, the observers, and those with the insight to see beyond the surface, would understand the depth of strategy and precision behind every second. And that, she realized, was the ultimate revelation. True influence is quiet, subtle, and almost imperceptible. It does not need applause. It does not need recognition. It acts through precision, patience, and the calculated application of power. The world sees only the outcome, but the true mastery lies in the invisible threads that make the outcome inevitable. As the car merged onto the highway, Princess Pacquiao allowed herself a deep, reflective breath. The terminal, the officers, the viral social media storm, all had served as instruments in a symphony of influence. And yet, the lesson extended far beyond them. Every observer, every viewer, every person who would hear the story now carried a piece of the lesson with them. Authority without respect is fragile, arrogance has consequences, and strategic calm is more powerful than aggression. Princess Pacquiao leaned back, letting the city blur past the window. The revelation was complete, not just to her, but to the few who had orchestrated it, and to the many who would witness its echo in the days, weeks, and months to come. The 9-minute confrontation had ended, but the lesson, and its subtle, far-reaching reverberations, was only beginning. The sun had begun to dip behind the city skyline, casting long golden shadows across the terminal where, hours earlier, history had quietly unfolded. What had started as a routine immigration encounter had become an international sensation, a story that would dominate headlines, social media feeds, and conversations around the world. But for Princess Pacquiao, it wasn't about fame. It was about authority, respect, and the undeniable consequences of arrogance. The terminal had emptied, travelers moving on to their next flights, still whispering and occasionally glancing back at the now empty counter. The officers, the catalysts of the confrontation, were gone, terminated, disciplined, and rendered powerless. Their arrogance had collapsed, and with it, their professional credibility. Yet the ripple effect extended far beyond them. Videos, images, and first-hand accounts had spread globally, creating a viral narrative that transcended geography, language, and culture. Social media was ablaze. Clips of Princess Pacquiao standing calm, composed, and unyielding at the counter had been viewed millions of times. Hashtags like Respect Princess Pacquiao and 9-Minute Justice trended worldwide. Analysts debated, commentators praised, and millions of viewers marveled at the precision with which she had orchestrated the outcome. The revelation of her strategic calm and subtle orchestration added a layer of awe. Few realized that every micro-expression, every subtle gesture, every glance had been intentionally designed to manipulate the situation without aggression. She had leveraged patience, influence, and timing to dismantle arrogance, and the results were undeniable. The world was witnessing a masterclass in authority and strategic intervention. In the following days, interviews and media appearances chronicled the event. Journalists sought her insights, social media influencers dissected her approach, and analysts praised the precision of her actions. She spoke sparingly, choosing her words carefully, reinforcing the lesson of respect and accountability. Every public statement reflected the same calm authority she had displayed at the terminal. "Authority isn't loud," she said in one interview. "It's strategic, patient, and precise. Arrogance can't withstand calm, calculated influence." Her words resonated across cultures and industries. Executives, public officials, and everyday people alike began sharing her story, not just as a viral spectacle, but as a blueprint for influence and conflict resolution. It became a reference point for leadership courses, training seminars, and even online masterclasses on strategic authority. Meanwhile, the officers who had once smirked arrogantly at her were forced to reckon with the full scope of their actions. Termination notices, HR documentation, and internal reviews were publicized quietly within their respective agencies, serving as a cautionary tale. Colleagues and peers whispered about the incident, the lesson spreading quietly but powerfully. Respect is the foundation of authority, and arrogance has consequences that can strike swiftly and without warning. Princess Pacquiao herself remained a symbol of poise and strategy. She was not celebrated for aggression, nor for confrontation. She was celebrated for her ability to maintain composure, to observe, and to act decisively when the moment demanded. The lesson transcended the immediate drama of the terminal. It became a case study in influence, patience, and the art of commanding respect without raising one's voice. Her father, Manny Pacquiao, watched the story unfold with quiet pride. He had instilled in her the principles of discipline, strategy, and subtle influence, and now the world was witnessing the culmination of that education. His message to her after the incident had been simple but profound. "You've turned respect into a force that cannot be ignored." The viral impact was immediate. Universities and leadership academies began referencing the incident in lectures, citing it as a perfect example of strategic authority in practice. Corporate leaders shared the story internally, emphasizing the lesson that unchecked arrogance could dismantle careers in moments. Even international observers noted the phenomenon, a single act of composure and strategy reshaping perceptions and reinforcing the importance of respect in professional environments worldwide. Back in the terminal, unseen cameras and social media posts continued to amplify her presence. Videos compiled by travelers showed her subtle nods, the confident way she held her posture, the unflinching gaze that had rendered the officers powerless. Analysts highlighted how her calm authority had preempted aggression, converting the situation into a demonstration of influence rather than confrontation. Princess Pacquiao herself remained grounded. She knew the importance of the lesson, but she also understood that its power lay not in visibility, but in subtlety. Influence, she realized, was most effective when it was precise, silent, and inevitable. The world saw the outcome. Very few would understand the invisible orchestration behind it. And perhaps that was the greatest legacy of all, the mastery of influence and strategy, hidden in plain sight, shaping behavior and perceptions without overt force. Her phone buzzed with messages of support, admiration, and gratitude. People she had never met reached out, thanking her for demonstrating the power of patience, composure, and strategic authority. Some recounted their own experiences with arrogance, realizing now how easily it could unravel under quiet, calculated pressure. The ripple effects of the 9-minute confrontation were spreading faster than any social media algorithm could track. In the quiet moments, Princess Pacquiao reflected on the day's events. The confrontation had been swift, precise, and conclusive. Arrogance had been dismantled. Authority had been asserted. And yet the story's impact was only beginning. The lessons would extend far beyond the terminal, beyond the viral videos, beyond the immediate fallout. Every professional, every observer, every follower of the story would carry a piece of the lesson forward. And then came the final piece of confirmation, a private message from the government official who had helped orchestrate the response. Your composure and strategy have set a new standard. The ripple is global. The lesson will be remembered. Princess Pacquiao allowed herself a small, reflective smile. The confrontation, the viral storm, the termination of the officers, it was all part of a larger narrative, a narrative about respect, influence, patience, and the undeniable consequences of arrogance. The world had witnessed it, and more importantly, it had learned from it. Even as the sun fully set, casting the terminal in the golden glow of dusk, the story continued to unfold. Social media continued to circulate clips, articles analyzed the implications, and observers dissected the subtle strategies that had allowed a 9-minute confrontation to achieve such monumental impact. The officer's downfall became a global case study in humility and accountability, while Princess Pacquiao's calm, strategic authority became a symbol of influence in action. And yet in her heart, she knew the most profound impact was invisible. The ripple effects, the subtle shifts in how people perceived authority, respect, and strategic influence, would continue to grow, unseen but undeniable. The lesson had been delivered not with anger, not with confrontation, but with the quiet, calculated force of precision and timing. As she stepped into the car that would take her to her next destination, Princess Pacquiao felt a sense of calm satisfaction. The officers had been held accountable. The world had witnessed a masterclass in influence. Social media had amplified the story globally. And yet, the real legacy, the lesson in strategy, respect, and composure, remained far-reaching and enduring. She glanced at her phone one last time. Another message from her father. The legacy is yours, make it last. Princess Pacquiao leaned back, allowing the city lights to blur past the window. The 9-minute confrontation had ended, but the legacy, the lesson, the influence, and the ripple effects was just beginning. And somewhere, in offices, homes, and terminals around the world, people would remember. They would respect. They would learn. And they would carry forward the lesson of a calm, composed, and undeniably powerful figure who had turned 9 minutes into a lifetime of influence.